In the mid-1980s, ILRI was approached by the Ethiopian authorities to help them with a specific problem. And that was a problem on how they could expand agricultural productivity in many of the fertile river valleys that they have throughout the country. And this was in the context of the fact that in many of the highland areas, there was overpopulation, there was a real crisis in terms of famine, a failure of farming, and the government was looking to kind of overall within the country reduce the risks and improve agricultural productivity. So this was presented to ILRI as a very simple problem of how can we reduce the Trypanosomosis problem, which was the big constraint to people farming in these river valleys, where you needed a combination of livestock and human power to make agriculture work. So we had this particular kind of short-term vulnerability issue where they needed to feed more people and they needed to expand resources. But how that was going to change was quite dynamic. And so originally when we started off with this simple idea, we looked at different opportunities for controlling that could be done by communities and could be done sustainably. And it took some time to understand this. But at the same time, we recognized that there would be important kind of environmental consequences of moving agriculture into new areas.
I was hired actually at ILRI to look at the environmental impacts of the tsetse fly, and the Gibe Valley was the first place that we did that research. And from my perspective, it was groundbreaking because it was a different approach to doing sort of classical agricultural development. We were no longer just concerned with controlling the tsetse fly. We were no longer just concerned with improving livestock productivity. We were concerned about the economics of those impacts, and we brought in the environmental aspects. It was a well-integrated program at the beginning. And there was no other research that I knew of that was tackling all of those issues at once at the time. So in fact, it was a groundbreaking piece of research. And what happened in Gibe Valley is that as people had more healthy livestock, they were able to plow greater areas of land. And as they plowed greater areas of land, they of course had more food to eat, but also that would obviously have impacts on the environment. And our findings from about 1994 until 1997 showed that this expansion of cultivation as a result of the tsetse control was having very little impact on the environment. We redid the research in about 2001 and found much, much larger impacts of the environment. And initially what happened was as these farms expanded, it was a mix of farms and woodlots and small hedgerows, and that actually supported biodiversity and supported conserving soils very nicely. But over time, it appears that it's moved much more into the direction of a less sustainable landscape. Now, it depends on what you want to use the landscape for. From a short-term perspective, of course, the people that move there are better off. Over the long term, will it become degraded? I don't know the answer to that. In fact, we don't even know if it's degraded now because we haven't followed up on that research. So what this points out is the really challenging trade-offs that we've seen over time between short-term development goals, feeding people, reducing poverty, and long-term sustainability. And I think the thing that we need to do next is to make to do a really good job at looking at those trade-offs and trying to figure out what it is from a community perspective that people need the most. Certainly water is going to be a big issue. Certainly soil fertility is going to be a big issue. With biodiversity, it's probably less of a concern at a community level, but more at a more national level, the conservation of biodiversity. And I think that we have a real opportunity here to go back and do the research again, and then also to take an innovation systems approach that we've taken here, which is really consulting with the communities about what the issues are from their perspectives, what they've seen over time, and to sort of develop this hybrid understanding of the environment that is both from the scientific perspective and also from the local community perspective.
This film really talks a lot about the kind of organizational issues of how you mobilize communities, how you can bring them together to deal with their problems. But for communities, some of the broader sustainability issues are hard for them to deal with. And I think as we move forward, we've got important baseline data on environmental use in Gibe Valley, and the next step will be really to work with communities to try and paint a broader picture of what are the implications of their expanded use of agriculture and livestock in Gibe Valley, and what are the implications for how they can manage that over time.